had always known the streets better than she knew the inside of a classroom. She had learned the language of survival early. How to move like the shadows, how to read the signs of danger before they arrived, how to remain invisible when every corner seemed to hold a threat. But it was in the underbelly of the city, the darkest corners where the gangsters ruled, that she learned the unspoken truth. Nothing came without a price. Her father, once a powerful figure in the city's underground world, was a faded memory now. His reputation a shadow of its former self. But his name still carried weight, heavy, suffocating weight. People still whispered about him in hushed tones, still avoided his old haunts like the plague. Lena often wondered if the streets were more in love with his legend than with the man himself. But what she never realized was that the real price was the silence that followed his fall from grace, the loneliness that came with being the daughter of a man whose crimes had caught up with him. It was one particular night when she first crossed paths with him, Victor. His name was known, feared even. A tall, broad-shouldered figure with eyes like steel, always calm, always calculating. He exuded power without a word, without effort. People followed him not just out of loyalty but because they feared the consequences of not doing so. Lena had been running errands for her father at the time, trying to make herself useful, to feel like she belonged. The night was thick with tension, the kind that comes before something explosive happens. As she turned a corner, she collided with him, literally ran straight into his chest. She felt the sharpness of his gaze before she even looked up. His eyes were cold but not unkind, as though he could see right through her, peeling back every layer she had carefully constructed. The moment was fleeting, but it lingered in Lena's memory like a ghost. He didn't apologize for bumping into her. Instead, he simply assessed her in a way that made her feel both exposed and oddly secure. He didn't say a word, yet she felt as though he knew her entire story. There was a tension that hung between them, a quiet understanding that both knew the nature of the game they were playing. She had no illusions. He wasn't there to protect her or offer her some false sense of comfort. He was there for his own reasons, just like everyone else. But in that first encounter, Lena realized something important. Victor wasn't someone you could just ignore. He was a storm waiting to happen, and the only thing you could do was brace for it or be swept away. That night, Victor didn't ask for her help. Instead, he told her something that would shape her life forever.
You're not meant for this world, Lena, but you're already in it. Might as well learn how to survive.
It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of fact. And in the depths of her heart, Lena knew he was right. As weeks passed, their paths crossed more frequently. He appeared when she least expected it, a ghost lurking in the corners of her life. Sometimes he'd stop by her father's hideout, always business, never personal, but he made a point of watching her, studying her. There was something magnetic about his presence, something magnetic about how he seemed to take the chaos of their world and turn it into a symphony of order, a kind of brutal precision that made even the most hardened criminals stop and listen. One evening, as the city's pulse echoed through the narrow streets, Lena found herself standing near the edge of the city's decrepit docks. The scent of salt water mixed with the acrid stench of gasoline and damp concrete. A small boat was unloading, and a group of men was moving boxes of contraband. She didn't see him at first. The air was thick, muffling sound, but then she felt it, the shift in the atmosphere. Her heartbeat quickened. She turned, and there he was, Victor. His silhouette framed by the dim glow of streetlights. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other. No words. Just the unspoken recognition of what was happening.
I thought you might need some help,
he said, his voice low but steady. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't an invitation. It was a simple statement, an acknowledgement of the dangerous territory they both occupied. Lena didn't respond immediately. The air between them crackled with anticipation. He had become a constant in her life, a shadow that clung to her every step. But this moment was different. There was something almost tender in the way he looked at her. He wasn't just sizing her up anymore. There was an unreadable emotion in his eyes, something raw and human that she hadn't expected. And just like that, the game shifted. She didn't know whether she was more afraid of the danger he posed or the possibility that, despite everything, she might want him in her life. Victor didn't wait for her answer. Instead, he offered her a thin, knowing smile.
The city is full of people pretending to be something they're not. You, Lena, you're no different. But you have potential. And you'll need it.
It wasn't a compliment, and it certainly wasn't a warning. It was simply a fact, one that would cling to her like the stench of the city she was bound to. As she turned to leave, she could feel his gaze still on her, burning through the back of her skull. She was already in too deep, and yet she didn't know if she wanted out. The pull of Victor's world was magnetic. And as much as she tried to resist it, she knew that, somewhere in the quiet depths of her heart, she was already falling for the life that he led. A life of chaos, violence, and darkness, but one that offered a kind of raw, untamed love she didn't know how to live without. The tension in the air had thickened, and Lena's life had started to fray at the edges. Each day spent with Victor felt like a delicate dance between the fear of falling too deeply into the world he inhabited and the desperate need to belong somewhere. Anywhere. Their relationship, if it could even be called that, was built on a series of unspoken rules. There was no space for affection, no room for vulnerability. He was too deep into the gang's operations to even consider what a normal life might look like. But somehow, Lena found herself caught up in the very web she had tried to avoid for so long. Victor was always present in the most unexpected moments, his presence as commanding as the city's endless roar. He had a way of entering a room that made everyone else fall silent, as if he could control not just the people but the very air around them. His eyes, sharp and calculating, always seemed to lock onto Lena, cutting through her carefully constructed armor. But she could never fully read him. His emotions were always just beneath the surface, but never enough to give her the clarity she craved. Victor's dangerous world didn't just consist of criminal dealings and power struggles. It was a world of constant survival, where every wrong move could mean a bullet to the head or worse. And the higher up he climbed, the more vicious the battles became. It wasn't long before Lena witnessed firsthand how deep the violence ran. One night, she found herself at one of the gang's hidden locations, a run-down building on the edge of the city, tucked away behind stacks of crates and a maze of narrow alleys. Victor had told her to stay inside to keep her head low, but her curiosity and the gnawing feeling in her gut drove her out into the streets anyway. It was there, in the darkened alleyway, that she stumbled upon something that would haunt her for years to come. She had barely turned the corner when she saw them. The two men, once loyal to Victor, now kneeling in front of him. The cold steel of a gun glinted in the moonlight, and the tension in the air was palpable. She froze, hidden in the shadows, too terrified to move. Victor stood tall, his face a mask of indifference, his gaze fixed on the men before him. They had betrayed him, crossed a line they couldn't come back from. The men begged, pleaded, their voices shaking with fear. But Victor didn't flinch. His voice was calm, devoid of mercy.
Betrayal has a price,
He said, his tone icy.
and it's never paid in full with words.
The gunshot that followed wasn't a sound Lena would ever forget. It rang through her bones, sending a shiver down her spine. She wanted to turn away, to block it out, but she couldn't. She watched as the men crumpled to the ground, their lives snuffed out in a heartbeat. Lena wanted to scream, to run, to escape the nightmare that was unfolding before her. But instead she stood frozen, staring at the lifeless bodies, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known that Victor was dangerous. She had seen the violence in him from the beginning. But seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. It wasn't just power that radiated from him. It was cold, ruthless control. And Lena realized, with a sickening clarity, that she was more deeply entrenched in this world than she had ever imagined. Later, when she confronted him, her voice trembled, and she struggled to keep her composure.
You didn't have to kill them.
She whispered, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Victor's gaze was unwavering, his eyes colder than ever.
I didn't have a choice.
Please provide prompts to generate images for this story. He replied, as if the very idea of mercy was foreign to him.
Weakness isn't tolerated here. They knew the risks, and they failed.
Lena wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him that there was always a choice. But she held her tongue, knowing that in his world, her words meant nothing. She was nothing. To him, she was just another piece on the board, a pawn who didn't understand the game. And yet she stayed. The nights grew longer, the weight heavier. Lena couldn't ignore the pull of Victor, the way he seemed to be both her savior and her prison. He needed her in ways she didn't fully understand. She was his anchor, his constant amidst the chaos. But she was also starting to feel the sharp edges of his world cutting into her. The streets were not kind to women like her, and she knew it wasn't just the gang that posed a danger. It was everything that came with it. The lies, the betrayals, the constant threat of death. One evening, the tension came to a head. Victor had been acting distant, more withdrawn than usual. The deals he had been making with rival factions were starting to unravel, and Lena could see the strain in his face. He had grown more unpredictable, more volatile, and it was beginning to affect her in ways she couldn't explain. She had been sitting in his apartment, waiting for him to return from yet another late-night meeting. The hours dragged on. The city outside seemed to breathe with an almost eerie quiet, as if it too were holding its breath. And when he finally walked through the door, it was with a look in his eyes that sent a chill through her. Lena barely had time to react before he snapped, grabbing her by the wrist and pulling her into the center of the room.
Do you think you understand what this life is about?
He demanded, his grip tightening. His voice was low, dangerous, filled with a raw intensity that made her heart race.
You think I do this for fun? You think I want this? I'm doing this because if I don't, we all die. You. Me. Everyone.
Lena's breath hitched, but she held his gaze.
You're pushing me away, Victor.
She whispered, her voice breaking.
You're pushing me away and you don't even realize it.
He didn't respond right away, his anger still simmering beneath the surface. For a long moment they stood there, staring at each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. And in that moment, Lena understood the harsh truth. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for her own sanity, her own soul. She was fighting to hold on to something real in a world that was slowly consuming her. But Victor wasn't the man to give her that. Not now, maybe not ever. In the silence that followed, she realized how deep the struggle really went. It wasn't just about surviving the gang's world. It was about surviving him. Surviving the person she had become when she fell for him. The deeper Lena sank into Victor's world, the more she realized that the glittering surface of power and wealth masked a profound emptiness. What had once felt like an adrenaline-fueled escape from a life of survival began to feel like a trap, a never-ending cycle of violence, deceit, and inevitable betrayal. And the closer she got to Victor, the more she saw how far gone he truly was. At first, she tried to ignore the changes. His increasing coldness, his withdrawn moments, but it became impossible. The man who had once captivated her with his sharp intellect, his quiet but intense charisma, had begun to unravel. His presence was still magnetic, but it was no longer warmth that radiated from him. It was darkness. The darkness of someone who had seen too much, done too much, and realized too late that they couldn't escape the consequences of their actions. One night, Lena waited for him in his apartment, perched on the edge of the couch. The ticking of the clock was the only sound that filled the room. She had grown used to the silence, to the waiting. But tonight felt different. There was a gnawing feeling in her gut, an ominous premonition that something was about to break. The door clicked open and Victor stepped inside. His eyes dull. His shoulders slumped in a way that made him seem smaller than he had ever appeared before. He didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he crossed the room and poured himself a drink. His movements mechanical. She had seen him like this before. Drained, detached, but this time it was different. The air between them felt thick, suffocating.
Victor.
She said quietly, not sure what she was expecting. She couldn't keep quiet anymore. She couldn't let him spiral without acknowledging it.
What's happening to you? You're not the same.
He didn't answer at first. He just swirled the liquid in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. There was a coldness to his stare, a distance she couldn't breach.
Nothing's happening to me.
He finally said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion.
I'm just tired.
The words stung more than they should have. She knew there was more beneath the surface, but he wasn't going to open up. Not tonight. He never did.
You're not just tired, Victor. You're slipping. We're all slipping.
Lena said, her voice rising slightly, though she immediately regretted it. She had never been one to beg, to plead, but something inside her snapped. The longer she stayed, the more she felt herself losing her grip on the life she had once known. He shot her a glance, one that wasn't filled with anger, but something far worse, indifference.
This life was never meant to be pretty. It was never meant to be easy.
Lena's heart ached as she realized how deep the divide between them had become. She had been trying to hold on to some illusion of who he had been, but that man had long since disappeared. The Victor she loved, the one with ambition, vision, even a hint of warmth, was fading, replaced by someone she no longer recognized. A man who had become a prisoner to the very darkness he had embraced. Days turned into weeks, and Lena's once vibrant hope began to wither. She started to notice the telltale signs of his unraveling. His outbursts of anger, his inability to sleep, the self-destructive behavior that now defined him. The quiet, methodical killer from before was now a man on the edge, consumed by his own demons. One night, as the city lights flickered outside their window, Lena found herself in a dimly lit bar, waiting for Victor to finish a deal. The place smelled of old whiskey and stale cigarettes. The noise was deafening, but her thoughts were louder. Her mind kept returning to the conversations she had overheard, rumors of betrayal within the gang, whispers of someone plotting against him. When he finally entered the bar, the scene immediately quieted, as if everyone in the room understood that he wasn't someone to be crossed. But tonight something was different. There was a tension in the air that Lena couldn't shake. Victor was on edge more so than usual, his movements jerky and unpredictable. He took a seat beside her, his eyes scanning the room like a predator. For a moment, Lena saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: vulnerability. He wasn't just fighting external enemies, he was fighting himself. But even then there was no reaching him. The man who once held power with a quiet confidence now sat beside her, hollow and broken.
They're coming for me,
he muttered, his voice barely audible above the noise.
I can feel it. They're all just waiting for me to slip.
Lena's heart sank. It wasn't the first time he had expressed this fear, but it felt different tonight. The weight of his words hung heavy between them. She wanted to reach out to hold him, but she couldn't. The distance between them had become too great. Her love for him, once a lifeline, was now a source of torment. She had been holding on, hoping that he would find his way back, but it was becoming clear that he was too far gone. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and a group of armed men burst in, their faces masked with the same cold determination that Victor once embodied. The room erupted into chaos. Guns were drawn, and the once civilized gathering descended into a brutal confrontation. Victor didn't hesitate. He was up and moving, instinctively taking control of the situation. But it was clear, this was no longer just about survival. This was about pride, about maintaining a facade that was crumbling from the inside out. As the violence unfolded around them, Lena found herself in the thick of it. She ducked behind a table, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no turning back now. She could feel the cold sweat trickling down her back, the fear tightening around her chest. But it wasn't just fear for her own life, it was fear for him. For the man she had once loved, who had now become someone she barely recognized. When the dust finally settled, Victor emerged from the chaos, his suit torn and bloodied, his face a mask of exhaustion. He didn't look at Lena. He didn't say a word. He simply walked past her, as though she no longer mattered. And in that moment, Lena realized just how far he had fallen. The man who had once been her anchor was now a broken shell, his soul fractured beyond repair. The violence had taken its toll, not just on him but on everything they had built together. The life they had once imagined now seemed like a distant dream, a fleeting memory that slipped through her fingers every time she tried to grasp it. Lena had been living on the edge for months now. Every moment felt like walking through a storm, with Victor by her side but drifting further away with each passing day. The life she had entered, the world of power and corruption, had taken its toll on her in ways she couldn't have imagined. And now, in the face of everything that had happened, there was a sickening realization deep within her. She might never escape, even if she wanted to. The tension between her and Victor had reached a breaking point. He had become more unpredictable than ever, and she had learned to brace herself for the next outburst, the next violent confrontation. His emotional distance had grown so wide that it felt like an insurmountable chasm. Lena had tried to talk to him, tried to reach him in those quiet moments when the world outside seemed to pause, but he was always just out of her grasp, as if he had already left her without saying goodbye. One evening, after another heated argument, she decided to take a walk to clear her mind. The city's streets were empty, the cold wind biting at her skin, but the isolation felt oddly comforting. She found herself wandering toward the docks, the place where everything had started to spiral out of control. The eerie calmness of the water, the sound of the waves gently lapping against the shore, was a strange contrast to the storm brewing inside her. As she walked, her thoughts swirled around her. About Victor, about the life they shared, and about how she had let herself be pulled deeper into the very darkness she had once feared. The past few weeks had been a blur of late-night deals, tense encounters with rivals, and Victor's increasingly erratic behavior. It wasn't just the violence. It was the secrecy, the lies. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. And then, as if fate had drawn her here, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find a figure stepping out of the shadows, Victor. His eyes were cold, unreadable, like glass. There was something different about him tonight, something almost calculated in the way he moved toward her.
Lena.
Victor.
She replied, trying to mask the unease in her voice. She had no idea what he was about to say, but she could feel that the air between them had shifted. Something was off. He wasn't here for a reconciliation. She could sense it.
What's going on, Victor? Why are you like this? Why are you pushing me away?
Her words came out more desperate than she intended, her emotions bubbling to the surface in a way she couldn't control. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, studying her with an unsettling intensity. And then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm.
I can't protect you anymore, Lena.
Her heart stopped. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had heard him say cold things before, but this felt different. There was finality in his tone, as if he had made a decision that couldn't be undone.
What are you talking about?
She asked, her voice trembling. She stepped forward, feeling her breath catch in her throat.
You're pushing me away like I'm nothing.
Victor's gaze softened for a brief moment, but it didn't last.
It's not that. It's just, the more you're around me, the more I drag you into this mess. You're better off without me.
The words felt like a betrayal. All the promises, all the things they had shared, the laughter, the late-night conversations, everything was unraveling before her eyes. She had believed that they were in this together, that no matter what, they would find a way to survive. But now, Victor was telling her that she wasn't just an outsider to his world. She was a burden, a weakness. And that, in itself, was the cruelest thing he could have said.
You don't get to decide that for me.
She spat, her anger rising.
You don't get to push me away and then tell me it's for my own good. You've been doing that for months, Victor. Every time you pull away, every time you shut me out, you're making the decision for me. You think I'm weak? That I can't handle this world with you? You don't know me.
Victor's expression hardened again, and there was a sharpness to his movements that made her take a step back.
I know you better than you think, Lena. This isn't a life for someone like you. This is a world of betrayal, of blood, and it's not something I can protect you from anymore.
The words cut through her like a knife. All this time, she had believed that love would be enough to keep them afloat. But now she saw the truth in his eyes. He had already given up on her. He had already given up on them. And just like that, everything she thought she knew about their relationship began to crumble. The man she had once trusted with her life, the man she had loved with every ounce of her being, was standing before her, telling her that she meant nothing. That the bond they shared was just another casualty of the violence that consumed him.
I'm done, Lena.
He said, his voice devoid of emotion.
This is over.
Her world seemed to collapse around her, the ground beneath her feet disappearing. The pain of his words felt physical, as if something inside her had shattered. She had always known there was a price to living this life, but she hadn't realized that the price would be losing him, not just physically but emotionally. And now that he was pulling away completely, she was left standing there, empty and lost.
I can't do this anymore.
He repeated, his eyes cold. Before she could respond, before she could beg him to stay or try to make him understand, he turned and walked away. Just like that, he was gone, leaving her standing in the night, feeling more alone than she ever had before. The air felt colder, the world darker. Lena wanted to scream, to run after him, to fight for him. But something inside her held her back. The realization settled deep within her. This was the final betrayal. He had given up on her, just as much as he had given up on himself. The next few days were a blur of numbness. The ache in her chest was constant, but there was no one left to talk to. She couldn't go to her father's people. They would see her as weak, as someone who had fallen victim to her emotions. And as for Victor, he had gone too far. He had chosen the life of the gang over her, over them. The promises they had made to each other now felt like distant memories, things of the past. Lena found herself at the same docks once more, staring out at the water. She wondered how many people before her had stood in the same place, broken and betrayed, watching the city fade into the distance. The life she had hoped for, the life she had imagined with Victor, was now gone, swallowed up by the same darkness that had consumed him. And in that silence, as the cold wind whipped through her hair, she realized that there was no coming back. In the aftermath of Victor's final words, the world around Lena seemed to collapse in on itself. The love she had so fiercely fought for now felt like an illusion, a dream that she had desperately tried to make real, only to watch it disintegrate before her eyes. The streets she once walked with him felt emptier now. The apartment they had shared was just a cold, hollow shell. There was nothing left. No warmth, no connection. Just the echo of his absence, reverberating in every corner of her life. For days, Lena wandered the city, unsure of what to do, unsure of who she was anymore. She was no longer the woman who had walked into this world with hope and optimism. She wasn't even sure she knew who she was without Victor, without the dangerous love that had once consumed her. But as the days passed, something inside her began to harden. The numbness that had enveloped her slowly morphed into something more dangerous. A quiet fury. She could feel herself transforming, reshaping into someone who wouldn't just accept this broken version of herself. She had already lost everything she held dear. Now it was time to take control. It started with a visit to Victor's world. His empire, his network. The underworld that had once felt alien to her now seemed like the only place where she could feel a sense of power again. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to take her life back. One evening, under the cover of darkness, Lena found herself standing in the lobby of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. The air inside was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and polished wood. She had never been inside this part of the world before, but tonight, she wasn't the innocent woman who had once dreamed of a life with Victor. She was something else now. Something colder. More determined. The building was a hub for the higher-ups in Victor's gang. People who controlled the flow of money, drugs, and power. They were the ones who decided the fate of everyone below them. Victor had always told her that these people were untouchable. But tonight, Lena was going to show them that no one was truly untouchable. She walked past the elevator doors, her steps measured, purposeful. Her heart beat in her chest, but it wasn't out of fear. It was out of anger. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. The soft hum of the motor filled her ears, but her mind was focused on one thing: getting to the top. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into the private offices of the gang's leaders. The room was dark, lit only by the dim glow of a few desk lamps. At the far end of the room, a man she didn't recognize sat behind a desk, papers scattered in front of him, a cigar hanging loosely from his lips. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing slightly.
"I didn't expect a visit,"
he said, his voice low and gravelly. Lena didn't hesitate. She walked forward, her gaze unwavering, her mind sharp with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose.
I need to speak with your boss.
She said simply. Her tone was cold, cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. The man chuckled darkly, blowing out a puff of smoke.
"You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're wasting your time. He's not interested in talking to anyone who's not important."
Lena's eyes never left his.
You don't understand. I'm not here for a conversation. I'm here to make sure Victor's enemies understand just how far he's willing to go to protect what's his.
The man's expression shifted, his hand pausing mid-motion as he processed her words. Lena could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. Victor's reputation wasn't something you could easily ignore. But Lena wasn't done.
Victor may be out of the game, but I'm not. I have something more than just words now. I have leverage. And if you want to stay on top, you're going to have to work with me.
Her words hung in the air as the man's expression darkened. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together in front of him.
"You're playing a dangerous game, Lena,"
he warned, but there was a trace of uncertainty in his voice.
"You don't know what you're up against."
Lena's response was almost a whisper, but the weight of it was heavy.
I don't need to know. I just need to know how to win.
The next few days were a blur of strategy, threats, and calculated moves. Lena's mind was a battlefield, filled with thoughts of vengeance and survival. She had been part of this world long enough to know how to play the game. Victor had taught her that much. She knew the right buttons to push, the people to talk to, and the alliances to make. But this was different. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about survival. And if Victor had chosen to abandon her, then she would make sure that she was the one who would dictate the future. Lena began to form alliances with some of Victor's closest confidants. People who had once feared him, people who were now seeing her as a potential ally. She had learned how to leverage her position, Victor's reputation, the knowledge she had gathered from their time together, and the raw determination that burned in her chest. She wasn't going to let Victor's betrayal define her. She was going to use it as fuel to carve her own path. Then one night, she found herself face to face with one of Victor's old rivals, a man who had been a thorn in Victor's side for years. His name was Marco, and he was everything Victor despised. Ruthless, calculating, and absolutely devoid of morals. He was sitting in a dimly lit bar when Lena approached him, her posture confident, her movements deliberate.
You and I both know that Victor is no longer the force he used to be. He's no longer in charge. But you still want control. You still want power. The question is, how badly do you want it?
Marco looked at her for a long moment, studying her face, as though trying to determine if she was a threat or an opportunity. But Lena wasn't afraid of him. She had nothing to lose anymore.
"You're playing a dangerous game,"
Marco said slowly, his eyes narrowing.
but maybe I can use someone like you.
Maybe,
Lena replied with a cold smile.
but you'll have to offer me more than just promises.
As she left the bar that night, the pieces of her plan were beginning to fall into place. She wasn't just a woman who had been left behind anymore. She was a force in her own right. A woman who had learned the lessons of betrayal, of loss, and who was now ready to take control of her own fate. But as the darkness of the city swallowed her whole, Lena knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let the past define her. She wasn't going to let Victor's absence break her. This world had already taken so much from her, but it hadn't taken everything. And now, it was time for her to take back what she could. The final confrontation came quicker than Lena anticipated. Victor, still at the helm of the gang, had been forced into a corner. His empire was crumbling. Rivals were closing in, and even his own allies were beginning to question his leadership. His desperation was palpable, but it was too late. Lena's network, her alliances, her careful plotting had positioned her as the new power player in this world. And she wasn't going to stop until she had everything. Lena stood across from Victor, a shadow of the woman he once knew. But this time it wasn't love that held her gaze. It was something much darker. Victor was still the same man, but now she saw him for what he truly was. A broken, tired shell of a man who had spent too long living in the shadows of his own creation. He wasn't the Victor anymore. He was a casualty of his own greed, his own hubris. And Lena wasn't going to mourn him.
Do you know what I learned after you walked away, Victor?
She asked, her voice steady, her eyes unwavering.
I learned how to take control. I learned that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself.
Victor stared at her, his face unreadable, but there was a flicker of recognition, of regret. But it was too late. Lena's hands were steady, and her resolve was unshakable. She had already won. Victor had lost.